Boosey popping in to join Rodders and me to compare notes on what's going on with this mad whatnot. Blimey, I'll tell you what. Anyway, yeah, gonna coverage from Spain, the UK, and the United States today on comparing notes on abject madness. Blimey. Aye. Busy?
All right.
Coming up in 3 minutes, mate. God bless you. All right. Oh, hold on. More on that. What's going on there? That's not right. There you go. Do. Copyright free Facebook, for crying out loud. Oh, right. Okay. Oh, well, start. Might as well. All right. Hold on. How do you do? Oh, blimey. Hold on a sec. Yeah, there you go. Hold on. We'll do this again. So you don't get any music there? You don't get any music? Oh, no music. All right. Okay. Well, that's the music. Yeah, that's weird. That. Hold on. That is all way too noisy. I've got two lots of music going on, and I don't understand why. A little bit of chaos, yeah? A little bit of chaos. First time doing this 5 o'clock GMT slot. Do apologise. Let's just try this again, yeah? Just try this again, just for the hell of it. Right. You see, that's the wrong music. Hold on. Right, shut up. Okay, all right, okay. We'll just start the show anyway. Boosey, good afternoon,
right.
sir. Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah.
California.
California. So it's 10 a.m.
Good morning. Yeah, good breakfast.
Ah, breakfast of champions, coffee.
Lovely, lovely. We got the Viscount popping in from London, where it is 5 o'clock. Where I am in Spain, Valencia, it's 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and we're obviously talking about what's going on in the world of coronavirus and market meltdown and goodness knows what else. Maybe just cover a few other stories going on too, like I don't know, Turkey. Basically, acts of war with Europe. Hasn't been kicked out of NATO yet. Probably look at a bit of that as well. And hopefully have a few laughs. Take your comments, your calls, and we'll try and work that out in a bit because I haven't sorted out a telephone number for you people to call into yet. This is the first show Monday to Friday, actually probably Saturday, Sunday as well, because I'm in quarantine now in Valencia. We've been quarantined all over Spain, as you've probably heard, as well as is the case already in Italy. And as of tonight, as I understand it, it's going to be the same in France. Chris, is that the case with you in the States? Are you actually quarantined yet, or does it vary state to state?
It's not at that point yet. We've recently had our governor come on the news waves and for the California fascist that he is. And he's just basically he's closed the bar. He hasn't got the power to do it without declaring martial laws, but he said he strongly recommends that all the bars, all the restaurants, anywhere where people meet up are closed down. Restaurants to only do deliveries and takeaways, no sit-in. And if you are to have a restaurant that wants to do a sit-in, they can only have a maximum. The maximum number is half their fire reg limit, so that they can practice social distancing.
Right.
In my city, the Unified School District has closed down. The college that I go to closed down, and we've got our classes cancelled for a week for most of my classes, while they work towards going fully online, which is going to be until at least the end of spring break, if not potentially till the end of the semester.
Right.
So, which actually causes its own problems with disabled students, because a lot of disabled students have specialist software and equipment that they use for their classes, but they're using this either the equipment's on loan or they're using the software in the high-tech suite at the college, because they're not giving them the software for their own personal computers, because the college can't afford to do that. So then they're disadvantaged with their studies because they can't use the software that they need for their studies.
Okay, let me just give you a bit of a rundown of what's going on in Spain, and then we'll go into a bit more comparison with Chris, because I want to find out what the state of emergency is in the States and what that means and so on and so forth. I listened to Governor Cuomo from New York State earlier talking a bit about this, and it sounds to me as though the states really need some kind of a universal policy, but we'll come on to that in a minute. The deal in Spain is that basically everybody is under quarantine. You can go to work if your work hasn't been shut down. So, for example, on the high street, most shops have been shut down. All the bars, all the restaurants, which, if anybody that's been to Spain knows, constitutes most of the businesses in Spain, have been shut down. All of them, without fail. You actually can't go shopping to close shops and stuff like that. You can't buy anything apart from food. Or, interestingly, you can get a haircut. Which I could probably do with, because every day's a bad hair day for me. But you can get a haircut. The last time I went to get a haircut, the bloke gave me a cold. So I'm not that tempted to go for a haircut. But you can go and get your shopping. I went to get my shopping earlier, and it's a kind of one out, one in procedure with, lots and lots of space in the supermarket inside. Wasn't any particular panic. The Spanish people are being very, very sociable about the whole thing, frankly. It wasn't that long ago since they had to endure Franco and abject fascism, after all. So the Civil War is still very much within living memory for a lot of Spanish folks, and so there is a pretty good tolerance to this situation going on over here at the moment, unlike in the UK, where there seems to be absolute pandemonium, despite the fact that they haven't actually yet got a quarantine situation, which is very interesting. And we'll talk about that maybe a bit later when the Viscount joins us. If he joins us, I don't know whether he's going to. This show, so that you know, is very laid back. It's going to be every day, probably including Saturday and Sunday, 7 days a week, almost certainly. Just an hour to begin with. It may become a couple of hours, maybe even 3 hours as things go on. The idea is to bring you update with the events going on, as well as to, try and give a bit of a morale boost as well. Maybe even have a sing-song. I don't know.
Well, you've got basically
to try and be there together with some of the neighbours and around the world and comparing notes, finding out what people have got to say. Bit of a cry here and there, and hopefully a good few laughs as well. Chris?
Well, yeah, because the socialisation aspect is extremely important because with mental health experts say that if people are in quarantine or they're not socialising for self-isolating for prolonged periods of time, that can create increased periods of anxiety, things like OCD, and it can actually cause a lot of mental health issues.
I'll tell you, mate, I got to put up with the wife.
So
me and the
show
wife
is actually probably beneficial.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know what? You got to. I'll tell you, she got dressed. She got all dressed up earlier. My missus. She got all dressed up. I said, "Well, where are you going? Where are you going?" She said, "I'm going for a walk to the kitchen." But yeah, I mean, it's going to be very interesting, isn't it? It's going to be very interesting. A lot of people hold up with their other halves and maybe the family and all the rest of it.
A lot of babies.
We could see massive divorce rate and a lot of kids. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of corona babies. I'll tell you, Chris. Are you holed up with your? Are you actually holed up yet? Have you been told, like me, that you're not allowed to leave the flat? This is the case with the whole of Spain, as with Italy and France later today. Have you been told you're not allowed to leave your premises unless you want to go to the pharmacist or to get some essential shopping, to the doctors, or to get a haircut, something like that?
No,
Chris?
No, they've not gone that far. The governor has threatened that if we don't do as he basically suggests, that the next stage would be martial law. So there's a veiled threat there to do as you're told. Or
martial law. Now, I have been describing what we've got in Spain as being soft martial law because there's no army involved. And people are actually doing it willingly because they don't want to catch this thing or they don't want to pass it on to their elderly relatives. In my case, personally, I'm not that bothered if I catch it. I actually, in a way, think it's probably better if you're healthy to catch it, because if you catch it now, probably better than catching it 5 years from now, when you've maybe got a slightly stronger constitution. But there's two reasons not to catch it. One, too early anyway. One, because we don't want to inundate the health service. And secondly, because we don't want to pass it on to our elderly relatives. Chris?
Yeah, well, I currently live with my in-laws, and they are in their 60s. So obviously me catching it would not be a good thing because getting past to them. So yeah, that is obviously a concern. Less concerned about myself, really, more concerned about others. But the hilarious thing, we're also getting it's not only toilet paper over here that they're running out of. They're running out of ammunition because people are going and purchasing more ammunition, bulk buying ammunition,
right
out here.
Right. Yeah.
So
I do I'm very interested to hear that angle because, of course, in the UK, we had our guns taken away from us, and there's no protection there when the police stand down. But before we'll come on to that maybe a bit later. Tell me though, are you sure that it's martial law they're looking at imposing?
Well,
What it is? What is the state? Is it called a state of emergency that Trump
we
has
have
imposed, or what?
part of the issue is we have the separation of states and state rights. So we have the federal government that has declared a state of emergency, which has meant that federally the president now has a lot more power than he did have, and effectively can rule a bit more like by fiat. Um, he can make decision. It's the step down from there being martial law.
Right.
Federally.
So what can he do?
But we also have the state level where they can declare, the individual states can declare martial law, and you have the National Guard, and the National Guard can be mobilized by the governor or by the president. However, the only difference being that the president ultimately can countermand the governor. So if a governor goes rogue and wants to try and mobilize the National Guard, the president can countermand him and say, well, actually, no, I'm standing you down. And as commander-in-chief can kind of deal with that situation. But the governor of California would be within his rights to mobilize the California National Guard and put boots on the ground.
Right. Okay. So it is not particularly joined up, is it? Cuomo earlier, New York governor, was saying that at the moment one state can say one thing in terms of the rules and regs. Whether
every
or not,
state
for example, bars can be open, you can go here or there, maybe to the parks, for example. If they have a different rule set in, say, Pennsylvania, he was explaining, you could kind of like choose your state. Oh no, I'm just going to go to Penn State whilst this is going on.
And that is
whatever.
The thing. The federal government can make an overarching thing, and the states effectively there's rights that are laid down for the federal government and where the federal government can have supremacy. The states have supremacy if it's not laid down that that's a federal right. So anything that isn't explicitly covered as a federal right is a state right. So obviously with a state of emergency, martial law, those kind of things, the states can do it, however, individually, but the bare minimum will always be what in this situation will be what the federal government says.
Yeah.
They can do more than what the federal government says, or the federal government can actually then say, well, actually, no, you as a state are going too far and can countermand in this situation because it is a national emergency. And now by having declared a national emergency before the states have done it, the president effectively gets to set the speed of it, and if he sees any states going too far, and there are some states going too far. For example, there's Louisiana. We already know that Louisiana and and Illinois have passed.
Illinois.
Illinois. They passed bills as part of their state of emergencies, which are limiting firearms purchases and stuff
like that. They are using this as an excuse.
And they're abusing it. And following what happened after Hurricane Katrina, the Stafford Act was passed, which meant that the amount of they can do about people's Second Amendment rights has been greatly reduced.
Right to bear arms.
And effectively, what they're doing breaches the Stafford Act, which means that they're actually breaking federal law by doing
What is
so.
the Stafford Act? Sorry, that
The
happened
Stafford Act,
off the back of Hurricane
it came
Katrina.
off the back of Katrina, where people's rights were abused. Everyone was disarmed by force.
Yeah,
Um, and in effect, basically, people were didn't have any rights, and were basically being told, "You will do this, or you'll be shot." Um, but
yeah, it was
um,
pretty
the
nasty.
it
I
was
remember that whole
it was
thing.
very nasty. So what the Stafford Act has basically done is gone, there are abuses here. We are not going to do this again. And there's certain things, and one of the big ones is the only time that you can have your. There's only two times you can have your firearm taken off you, and it has to be returned. And only in one of those times it has to be returned. One is in an evacuation. If you are evacuated, when they're transporting you, you have to surrender if they require you to surrender your firearm, you have to surrender it, but they have to return it to you once you have been got to the place that you are evacuated to. So they can take it for the trip, but they have to give it back to you at the end of the trip.
Mm.
The other one is that if you commit a criminal act, you still can, with that firearm, you can still have that firearm taken off you as part of the criminal investigation.
Do you think that this is much of an issue at the moment in this situation? I mean, it does seem to me that the UK is going to have a big problem when it comes to what Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, is talking about. There's 4 phases of this crisis, of managing this crisis. And phase 4, which is basically when things are really difficult and the maximum cases are, being churned out every
Yeah.
day of infections or what have you. At that stage, the police will not be able to cope. Bearing in mind that because of austerity cuts and what have you, the police are short by about 20,000 in their ranks anyway, which Boris reckons he's going to replace, but he hasn't done yet because they haven't got round to it. They need training and all the rest of it. I don't know if they even started recruiting properly. But the bottom line is that at phase 4, they will be standing down the police from all but the most serious of crimes. So, for example, if your house gets burgled, tough. At that
And
stage,
you don't have your
hold
firearm
on.
to shoot.
Whoa, Chris,
shoot
please,
the bastard.
just one sec. At that stage, we got a problem because people cannot defend themselves because they had their firearms taken away from them. In the States, presumably, you're going to have a better chance of defending your property, for example, if it gets really nasty.
Yeah. No one's coming into this place. Let's put it that way. But yeah. No, it's one of those things. Obviously now because I've not got attendance at school. Well, I have no place now where really that's open that I can't go with my concealed carry. So I'm going to be 24/7 carrying whenever I'm out. Obviously, it's within reach when I'm in house. Um,
Conversely, is there not
but
a potential problem of trigger happy people?
no, and this is the problem that we get from people living in countries which have been disarmed. Um, the belief that people are trigger happy. Um,
In a disaster
yeah,
situation,
yeah,
emotions running high,
yeah,
could that not be an issue?
yeah. Basically, um, you're entitled to defend yourself, and it's just about what you tend to find. I say you probably have more problems in places like California and New York, which are, for the most part, they've they've tried, and Illinois, where they've tried to disarm a lot of people. Um, so gun ownership is less common. And what you do find is in areas where gun ownership is less common, people are less polite and people are more aggressive. Um,
You're talking about the difference between conservatives and liberals with a capital L,
not necessarily. It's more an armed society. It's a polite society. If you believe that the person, if just think about it, Ollie, if you believe that everyone you're talking to was carrying a firearm,
Mm-hmm.
how would
Yeah.
you deal with them? Are you likely to go off the rails at them and threaten them and get physical with them? No,
Mm-hmm.
you're
Okay.
not.
All right.
So it's that whole you people are more respectful
That's going to
if
be
there's
interesting to see how that pans out, is it not?
yeah. So
But the
I
bottom
would
line,
actually say
though,
it's going to be quite things are probably going to be quite calm. Um, the biggest problem would be if troops go on the streets because there is the American attitude of "don't tread on me," and if you try and tell me what I have to do, I'm going to do the damn opposite thing.
yeah,
So there's kind of there's an attitude, a willful disobedience of government attitude within the American psyche, which actually developed from the Civil War that took place between the British and the Americans.
yeah, okay. Looking at the markets today, I see that the Dow opened and immediately dropped by nigh on 9 points off the back of drops with the FTSE in the UK and the DAX and the CAC and so on and so forth. Everything basically down. The FTSE at the moment is down 4%, so it's recovered a lot throughout the day. The CAC, that's the French thing, 5.75. The DAX, that's the German thing, 5. The Nikkei, only 2.5 over there, doing relatively well, just 2.5 down. The Dow is down 8.65.
What's the what?
The green one, it's the BET, and that, I don't know what happens with that, but that is a different kind of a market. To be honest with you,
Okay.
I don't really know what the deal is with that. But the main markets are all down, big time down. And they now have gone down, over the course of the last 3 weeks by nearly a third of their value. Nearly a third of their value, I think, over the course of the last 3 weeks. Do you have any understanding of the markets, Chris?
A little bit. Basically, we've gone from a bull market in America to a bear market. So we've gone from it raging and going high, historic highs actually, to it dropping into the toilet. Now
it needed a correction anyway.
That's a big
didn't
problem with 401ks, which is how we do pensions over here, because they're share linked. So people's retirement funds are not looking pretty at the moment. They're not built. A lot of people have lost a lot of value in their basically in their retirement funds. So we've got to kind of hope that things do go up for at some point, because otherwise that's going to cause its own problems with things like social security payments. We're going to the amount that we're going to have to pay with social security, which is already a lot of that money's disappeared. So yeah, that's going to cause all sorts of problems. But how I would
just to give a bit of insight into what's going on with the Fed trying to correct this, because they actually reduced interest rates earlier today by 0.5% to practically on zero now. There was bugger all room for maneuver as it was. And even though they did that, the Fed, when it opened, dropped, as I said, by nearly 9% and has barely recovered, but 0.25% or something since then. They are saying, the Fed says will offer an additional $500 billion in overnight repo funding markets. In other words, print money, print money, print money. A day after a dramatic move in interest rates According to CNBC, the Federal Reserve on Monday increased the amount of liquidity it's offering in short-term lending to the financial industry. In a midday announcement, the New York Fed said it will conduct a $500 billion repo operation this afternoon, another move targeted at keeping money flowing through the system. Repo involves banks putting up high-quality collateral like treasuries in exchange for the liquidity they need to conduct operations. Monday's move comes as the Fed stepped up the operations last week, offering up to $1.5 trillion of printing money, just another $1.5 trillion printed, or just to the press of a button.
And they can do that because there's no actual value to any of the money in the central banking system that exists. The Federal Reserve is part of the central banking system, and it's all based on, well, nothing really. There's nothing.
I was going to say anything.
Yeah,
nothing at all.
Well,
confidence is the answer,
based more
Chris.
on us,
confidence,
as people.
But there isn't any.
No, it's actually based more on the people and our earning potential, effectively, rather than something nice and fixed like gold. Hell, if I knew this was going to happen, it might have been a good idea to buy a load of gold.
Well, I'm not sure. Actually, gold has not done very well.
Because it ain't going to be cheap now.
No. Hold on. Gold today again has lost over 1%, and silver has lost over 1.5%.
Okay, I might need to go buy some then, because
silver,
that will go up.
Has lost 11% today. Apparently, 11% silver has lost. I'll tell you, it doesn't make any sense at all that the metals you would think. But apparently, what's happening is that the traders are having to sell their metals in order to fund their shortfalls in other aspects of the market. Basically, the market's gone that bad that they're having to sell just to keep going, and it's flooding the market with this, which makes it cheap. It is a meltdown. Oil also is down again today, 7.5%. Right, I want to take some comments. Let me just take some comments, Chris, and then I want to come back to you.
Of course.
I don't know where the Viscount is, whether he's going to join us to talk about the UK, but if not to worry. We'll do that tomorrow anyway. We are going to be here every day at 5 o'clock GMT, 1 p.m. Eastern Time in the States, and about 4 a.m. in Australia, I think it is. So if you want to come and join us, please do. I would normally be taking calls as well, but seeing as this is the first show of this kind, of this new sort of format, I buggered up and I haven't worked out the phone number. So I do apologise, but tomorrow I will be taking calls as well. But we do have some comments. And the downliner says, silver was your best bet, but it's really hard to buy now. I mean, if you are going to buy this kind of stuff, you want the physical stuff. You don't want to get it on paper because you might never realise any of that. Jones.
You want to buy...
Go on. Yeah. You want to buy what?
You want tangible stuff at this moment in time. But yeah, I would. My lovely wife.
I want to buy some aspirin.
We've brought me a nice cup of tea.
There you go. You might as well buy some tea, some good old Yorkshire tea. It's probably got more intrinsic value than any of this stuff.
Yeah.
Jones says
it's a bit.
Go on. Quick. I want to get some of these comments in, Chris.
Oh, sorry.
No. Go on.
No, we'll do the comments because there's plenty of time for me to speak.
All right. Okay. Jesus Jones says they know it's game over for them. So this is going to play out interestingly, and our favour if we can ride out to the next stage. And I think he's basically talking about the deep state, which Mr. Trump talks about quite a lot.
Say to that person right now, where we go one, we go all.
I don't know. I'll tell you something that's quite funny, which I just saw.
They will know that from what they were talking about. They will know exactly what I meant.
Right. Okay, well, I'll tell you someone who's going down, one and all, according to the Sun, and that's Saudi Prince, whatnot bloke, Turkey bin Mohammed bin Fard al Saud, whose boat has. Let me see if I can show you this. Whose boat is has basically capsized, and there you go. A $79 million super yacht owned by a Saudi prince capsized and partially sunk while it was docked in Greece, which is wonderfully symbolic of what's going on in the stock market at the moment, isn't it? So anyway, there you go.
Couldn't happen to a nicer family, could it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there you go. The luxury liner was in a repair yard in Athens when it turned over at a 45-degree angle, becoming partially submerged in the water, a bit like the markets and all the rest of it. Okay, fine. So I'll just take a few more comments, what have you. Carol Weston says, "Hi all, welcome to Armageddon. Where's Bruce Willis? We're needed." The spirit has been very, very good, actually, all in all, in Spain. I mean, we've only been quarantined for 1 day so far. In fact, only about half of that or whatever. But people have been already staying in their flats the last couple of days before the quarantine. And what they've been doing, folks, they've been coming out on their balconies at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the evening, and they've been clapping the emergency services and stuff like that. But people are doing other stuff as well around Spain. People are going out on their balconies and they're playing bingo. So you've got some bloke in the block of flats at the bottom of the flats or whatever who's calling, out the, I don't know, legs 11 or whatever. And then they've got all the numbers upstairs and the old bird's going, house! And then they are actually playing bingo in all the flats because everybody lives in flats.
Well, ensuring they can socialise in a way that is, deemed to be safe and they're not going to get in trouble for. It's like the Italians where you had them basically on the balconies singing the Italian national anthem every evening.
Yeah, that's right.
That's right. It's a form of, if I may say, it's the Blitz spirit.
It is. I wonder though if that is going to be the same in the UK. Because in Spain, it's a very family-oriented social fabric, as is the case in Italy, for example. But in the UK now, it isn't so much. It's been so broken up.
I would be a bit concerned that, remember the riots we had, like the one where the Harry Potter star got sent to prison and basically got cut out of the films, London riots.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Really?
I think it was the guy that played Crab, was originally playing Crab, was involved in the, or Goyle, one of the two, was actually caught looting in the London riots.
Right, I did read about that, yeah. Right. And he went to prison.
So I think that rioting is unfortunately more likely to happen in the UK than a Blitz spirit nowadays.
I am very surprised that there has been so much panic in the UK, Chris. Chris has been in the States for over a year now, but is a Blightsider from the UK, like me, and knows the culture very well, like me. And I am surprised, Chris, that there has been, well, I am and I'm not, because it is such a broken community now in the UK.
Yeah.
But it's something that we would have expected the Blitz spirit and keep calm and carry on sort of thing. Have a cup of tea. Don't worry about queuing. In fact, be glad to queue. In fact, want to queue. That's the British way. Instead of which, we've been seeing quite a bit of fearsome kind of buying of all this bog roll and all the rest of it. All this. How much of that is the tabloid press whipping things up out of all proportion, and how much of it is some sort of degenerate society going on there? In your opinion,
I think the media has a lot to play. I think stateside and in the UK, some of the some of these mainstream media stations need to have their satellites taken out so they can't broadcast.
Well, like the
Because
BBC.
it might actually do the world of it might deal with a lot of this panic because they are ramping everything up. But I think actually some of this does actually come back to um, swamp creature extraordinaire Tony Blair.
Yeah,
And I think that's because his new Labour government intentionally worked through social engineering to change society and break down the very fabrics that made British society,
yeah,
and change it with their multiculturalism thing and and ghettoization of culture of the segments of society. And by
I
doing
agree.
that, it's not a immigrant problem. It's just a case of society's being changed in such a way that it's this fragmented, pocketed, ghettoized society. And by doing that, it means there's no kumbaya moment that can happen because you have no links to these people because no one has a shared culture. Whereas over here, even even in California, it's to a California and places like California and New York are exceptions to the rule a lot of the time. But even here, you have more of a community spirit. I can if I don't have if I'm short some sugar, I'm baking a cake and I'm short a bit of sugar or short I need a couple of eggs. Rather than going out, I can knock on the neighbour's door and get a couple of eggs. That's
Mm,
I've got another neighbour who historically went hunting. Now he's cantankerous racist bastard, but
mm,
he he would if he was going out hunting, then he would bring back bring everything back, prepare it, and if people were needing meat, he would be giving some of what he's got and sharing out amongst the community. That's just how it works.
mm.
Um, they are trying to kind of segregate over here. That's kind of the Democrat playbook.
Mhm.
But because if we're divided, we can't stand up to them. But there is still, I would say that there's more of a community spirit now in Britain.
Okay, I want to. There are so many things that people want to talk about. I want to get into as many of these as we possibly can, but just bear in mind, people, that it's not going to be possible to do it in one show. There is so much to talk about from the market meltdown because that's important. Yeah, I've seen people making comments like, "What do I care? I'm not a rich man or whatever." Hey, I haven't got any money in the markets myself. Yeah, but the point is, anybody that's got a bit of a pension or even a state pension is involved somehow as well. And if you've got a job with a company that is listed, then it's pretty important to you as well. It's also pretty important if you rely, and everybody does, on companies. I'm not defending this Ponzi, this global Ponzi, in any way, shape, or form. I'm just saying that it is something that affects us all, and we may, we may well need some kind of a global reset. I'm sure there's all sorts of positive things. But anyway, there's different ways of looking at this. All sorts of things to discuss. Also, all the kind of the theories behind where this thing came from. We're going to try and get into that and understand some of the different theories going about, whether the theories are coming from the mainstream media or the alternative news. As far as I'm concerned, personally, I'm not sure what is what. I'm seeing a lot of people saying, "Oh, my theory is right and everybody else is wrong, and you're wrong over there." You know what? I don't know how they can know that. I don't know how they can know unless they are maybe one of the scientists who were engineering something in that Wuhan lab, or the guy that bit off the rat's head or whatever. I don't know how anybody can be sure about really anything. But we are going to try and explore these various theories, and of course look at the numbers going on around the world and so on and so forth. So just to give you a bit of an idea of the kind of things that this show is going to be covering over the days and weeks and months ahead, because I kind of think that we're going to be looking at this being a substantial crisis at least for the next 3 to 4 months, and not actually going away probably for a year. And some of the questions that we have going, just a sec, Chris, just a sec. Some of the questions that we have going forward are: how is this going to affect obviously our lives, the way that we lead our lives, both socially and in terms of our work, in terms of our travel, for example. Everything is going to change, in my opinion. A lot of things are going to change in terms of our habits of commuting to work and stuff like that. Probably going to change very much as well. And indeed, very, very likely, our social values. We're going to try and tackle all of that kind of stuff with Daily Chaos over the course of the next few months, at least. And whilst also trying to look at some of the other big stories that are going on. Not least of all, for example, what's going on with the US presidency, which a lot of us want to continue with this guy, Donald Trump, because we are hoping to see the draining of the swamp, and with things like Brexit, which is also extraordinarily important to see, not just for the sake of the sovereignty of the British people, but because if you care about sovereignty and individual culture on a local level and democracy on a local level, you want to see the EU flounder. And so there are all these kind of things. How is all this going to play out with this coronavirus? Has this coronavirus been somehow put into play in order to scupper a lot of the moves against what many of us would regard to be as globalist fascism? These are the kind of questions we've got. And Chris, mate, I hope you will pop on and discuss this with us on a regular basis and give us a stateside perspective, please.
Well, yeah. Well, at least this week, it's only 3 of my classes have basically said, "Yeah, you've got no classes this week." So, yeah, one of them is online, and I haven't been told that, so I'm going to assume that I still have to meet the deadlines and just do the work for that. But it means that instead of me having 40 hours of work to do this week, I probably have...
You're going to be holed up, mate, before you know it.
Yeah, well, there
you go.
They are talking until the end of the semester, potentially, that we may not be going back into the classroom until this semester. They're saying
you are not. What is that? What is that? June time or something?
First of June is the end of the semester, so they're already saying we're not going back until at least after spring break, which ends, which is beginning of about the second week of April is when we come back from spring break. So they're saying that that's the earliest, but we may not be going back to class, which is going to cause real problems depending on what you're doing. If you've taken a lab class where you've actually got to put chemicals together as part and do chemistry experiments, or you've got to dissect frogs, you're not going to be doing that in your home. Okay.
Let's take a few more comments on Facebook. Stephen Tannis Pullen says, my son was told last week he has to work from home until he is told differently. That's going to be the case for pretty much everybody in the UK within a fortnight, I can tell you. I mean, just look at the numbers, look at the maths and the way that this thing is going up exponentially. It is just going to happen. I'm afraid that's the way it is.
Yeah. We understand. I've been told I'll be working. Sorry.
Well, we understand that this is the case in France as of this afternoon. I think in about 10 minutes' time, I think the quarantine starts there in France, similar to in Spain and in Italy. Charlie Hudson says, of course it has, Ollie. It's been done on purpose, referring to whether or not this thing was released by some lab. I heard a theory earlier that one of those biological warfare labs in Wuhan was owned by George Soros. I don't know whether that's true or not. I suspect not, but I don't know. But there is a lot of info and disinfo, Chris, is there not? Look, I want to get through some more comments, and then we can maybe talk a bit more about that. I want to try and get some of these facts straight over the course of the next days and weeks. Lauren Page says, you can eat virus as it's dead, and our stomach deals with it. But vaccines will help a lot by injecting it into you. Wake up, people, please. Are viruses dead? I don't know. Yeah, I mean, Yazid says 68,000 people have recovered from it, not on the mainstream corrupt media. And I can tell you, for example, in China, 67,000 people alone, as of today, have recovered. 3,000 people, 3,200 have died. And that's off the back of 80,860 infections in China. So yes, in China, 67,800 people have recovered. Amanda Rolfson says, Ollie, under the health protection coronavirus regulations of 2020, which were passed last month, a person who is required to be kept in isolation can be taken there by a constable. With the use of reasonable force if necessary. Failure to comply with restrictions or absconding from isolation is punishable with a fine of up to £1,000. And I think a lot of people are very, very concerned that this thing is being used as an excuse to bring in a police state, Chris. And for example, I went to the supermarket earlier. And there were some items which were a bit rationed, which you can't, just buy as much of as you like. All in all, it was pretty good. I managed to get everything that I wanted or needed. But one of the things that you can't do now is you can't use cash. You have to use a credit card. Are we embarking, perhaps? Is this maybe? Am I being a bit conspiratorial in thinking that there's a bit of a police state type thing going on, and maybe a move towards a cashless society?
Well, obviously there is the issue that money could have the virus on it. This virus does have a long residual. A long residency. So if you put it on it, if it lands on it, if you sneeze in your hand and then put some coins in your hand or some notes, they're gonna get that virus on them. And so there is the potential issue of that. However, I can see how the deep state would want to use this and abuse this. But I do think that I've got a lot less fear about that, seeing as Hillary's not president and Trump's president, because someone who the swamp absolutely hates, having now greater powers than, and people were criticizing in the States him calling this state of emergency and giving himself this level of power. And then at the same point saying how great the governors like Cuomo and Newsom are when they've declared the same sort of powers for themselves within their states. So there's a lot of, never Trumpers. It's bad because it's the orange man's got the power. And I think he's a lot more intelligent than they try and give him credit for, and I think. How do you
think he's done with this? Because how would you compare his leadership with, for example, that of Ursula von der Leyen or Boris Johnson or the Italian bloke?
Ursula, let's be blunt. Ursula just needs an F. Grade her as an F. She's useless. People have asked for her assistance.
Why do you say that?
Basically,
why do you think that she's?
They want to be this all-powerful government, and when countries have come to them, like Italy, and asked for assistance, they've basically told them to go do one. And it's like, well, if you want this power, if you want the power, you need to have some solutions. So she's basically, if they were going to do this isolation and quarantining and all of this, it needed to happen soon. There's no point in it late in the day.
Let me just read this story quickly that's come in from Breitbart. EU President calls for borders to remain open during coronavirus outbreak. The President of the European Commission called for borders to remain open with the EU's free movement travel zone during the COVID-19 outbreak as countries across the bloc enact border controls. On Sunday, Ursula von der Leyen urged European Union member states to keep their borders open so that medical supplies will be able to be transported to countries most affected from the coronavirus. In this moment, she said, of crisis, it is of utmost importance to keep our internal market going. If we do not take action now, shops will start facing difficulties in refilling their stocks of certain products coming from elsewhere in the... Well, I mean, that makes sense. Let me just also read something else.
No, it doesn't. If you think about it...
She's right that medicines need to get through the border. She's not talking about people there. Let me just read
I know, but this is a thing. Those things will always get through the borders. Because even if you close down the borders, you're going to let those things through. You're not going
hopefully,
to...
I don't know. Maybe Breitbart is playing there. Let me read something else. This was from the Telegraph earlier. I'm just trying to get to grips with what the EU is finally doing. Because frankly, as Chris said a minute ago, they've done nothing. They have done absolutely nothing. They've just said, bring the air traffic, bring people in from China. It's fine. Come on in. And by the way, Boris Johnson has done exactly the same. And so have the likes of Justin Trudeau as well. I think today, 6 flights from China, including from Wuhan, flew into Canada, according to the rebel media. According to rebel media. Whereas Trump, on the other hand, the guy that's been given a really hard time by the mainstream media over, him being a conspiracy theorist and all the rest of the nonsense that they've been printing about his reaction to coronavirus, being a racist because he called it a Chinese virus and stuff like that, which, by the way, is what CNN were calling it a few weeks ago as well. He actually said we must stop flights from China and did stop flights from China several weeks ago. But just this is the Telegraph's take on Ursula von der Leyen and her deal. President of the European Union Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has proposed the restriction of non-essential travel to the European Union for 30 days. She should have done this 2 months ago. 2 months ago.
It's
the
too
proposed ban. Just a sec, Chris. Let me just get this out. The proposed ban on travel to the EU would have exemptions for long-term residents, family members of EU nationals, and diplomats. Doctors, nurses, care workers, and experts tackling the corona pandemic would also be spared from the ban. The transport of goods would also be exempted from the proposed ban, von der Leyen added, as would frontier workers who commute across the EU's borders. The EU travel ban proposal would not apply to UK citizens. Ursula von der Leyen told a press conference the UK citizens are European citizens, so of course there are no restrictions for the UK citizens to travel to the continent. She said the less travel, the more we can contain the virus. So she's basically now... The EU finally are trying to restrict non-essential international travel into the EU. Chris, I just find it amazing that it has taken so bloody long. We've had about 2,000 deaths in Italy as a result of this thing.
Yeah, this is the thing. When I am no virologist or anything like that, but I paid attention to the expert virologists and what they've said. Now, the best way to deal with it, as soon as possible, as soon as you know this thing is happening. And even Trump could be said to have done things late, but that he kind of was facing an impeachment when this actually all kicked off initially, which this is what people are not talking about. The first cases of this were in November and December of 2019. And what were they doing? They were impeaching the president.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, exactly. So he had to also be very careful because at this point they're talking about abuse of power. How were they going to use that if he suddenly declared a state of emergency because of some virus that people weren't even really talking about at the time that potentially was going to happen in the US and he was going to close borders? He would have basically been walking into their trap. So now it's become public. The first thing he did was went, right, we're closing the borders, and then he's called a racist for closing the borders to China and stopping all trade. It's like, well, until he could make sure that the trade could be screened, because we're talking about a virus that can live on fabrics, that can live on all these things. You need to be able to make sure that these clothes are coming in from China, they're not the basically smallpox blankets you're giving to Native Americans. You need to make sure that they don't have the bugs on there.
Okay, tell me. Let me just give you another angle on what's going on, just to compare again the Trump response with that of other international leaders. I mean, I have to say, I find it flabbergasting, the lack of proaction from the British government as well. I mean, I think the Spanish were late, the Italians were late, everybody was late. I mean, this thing was clearly a big problem in China, and China was the business. Hold on, whoa, Chris, let's not talk over. Is the business hub, the industrial hub of the entire planet, with businessmen flying in and out of there every day. I mean, if you look at the number of flights going in and out of China, just absolutely incredible. From Wuhan alone, actually, back then, the incredible amount of activity, and then you see what's going on. We saw the pictures on Twitter, these heart-rendering pictures of people and terrible scenes going on. Clearly a massive problem. They could have cut back on the flights. They didn't bother. And now, so let's have a look and just see what they're saying just to wrap up, because we've got to wrap up the show today in just a second. But according to Telegraph, their latest stuff coming out of the UK, coronavirus, latest news, UK cases rise to 1,543 as markets plunge and millions confront travel chaos. Now, Mr. Johnson, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, has said that the government has not announced such measures since wartime. Now, he's basically had a big briefing this afternoon. He says he does not remember government announcing a change like this in his lifetime. I just want to try and find out what that change is for you. Maybe is this following the Prime Minister's statement? Let me see if I can find this. Over 70s should take advice particularly seriously. I mean, this is all pretty obvious. A little bit like being told to wash your hands. You would have thought. Apparently, some people do need to be told to wash their hands. Here we go. UK is leading campaign to fight back, says Boris. A blatant lie. Mr. Johnson said, over the last few days, I've been comparing notes and talking to leaders around the world, and I can tell you the UK is now leading a growing campaign against all of our friends and allies. we're leading a campaign to fight back against this. It's absolute political rhetoric. I don't know, Chris. Am I being unfair to Boris? The bottom line is that the British government, it seems to me, has put profit before people's lives. And what we're going to see is a lot of people are going to lose their elderly parents or their grandparents prematurely because this government is still allowing children to go to school, for example, and then come home and mixing with their relatives, carrying this thing.
Yeah, I'm gonna be blunt. What's basically happened is Britain's been put off, has been caught on the hop. It has put.
What do you mean caught on the hop? I mean, this thing. The first cases were last year.
I know. This is what I'm saying. What I mean is they didn't take action when they needed to. Now, because they didn't take action and do what needed to happen, which actually should have been, we are going to close our borders to everyone. Screw you. And that is actually the best way to deal with a virus, is to self-isolate. Now,
people are being told.
What he's now done
with the official line, Chris, from the British government is that people should self-isolate when they start coughing. This thing is what's it called? Asynchronous something or other, where people are carrying this thing for up to 4 weeks before the symptoms actually present themselves.
Yeah, and this is the thing. It's stupid. So what's actually happening is he's now said, okay, we're now going to do the herd immunity. What he's basically said is, we failed to protect you, so the only option now is if we try and do the self-isolation thing, it's not going to work. So what we basically need to do is try and get people to build an immunity and survival of the fittest, which is not compassionate in the least.
That's
kind of where that's where we're now at, because there's no other option now. Because
why not?
No action
why is there no other option? Why not get people to quarantine in the way that is going on continental Europe?
Because what basically the part of the problem is we have a socialised healthcare system in the UK, and if we don't do it this way, that system is going to collapse in such a monumental fashion that it will never recover. And
Chris, it's going to anyway. It's going to. Well, I would suggest
what they're trying to do is go, okay, those people that are going to die, get them out of the way, and have the people, and then we'll keep this in, so the number of people we need to put in beds are not higher than the beds we've got, and that's why they're doing it this way. But Chris, that doesn't. A lot of people have been saying this. Nick Hancock, all the government, they've been saying this. To me, it doesn't make any sense that is true, for the simple reason that if you have kids going to school, you know how they come home with colds and goodness knows what, and they give it to their parents. They're going to bring this thing home as well. It doesn't affect kids, thank God. Especially. This is a big problem.
But hold on, let me finish. Whereas in Spain, they've been taken out of school, and in Italy, they've been taken out of school. There have been mistakes made. I think Italy, I don't know what happened there. It was very, very unlucky, it seems, in the early days. And perhaps a more aging population as well. All that, I don't know, olive oil or whatever. But the bottom line is that they have at least tried to stem the initial problems that they had by quarantining. In the UK, if you have kids mixing with each other, then with teachers and all the rest of it, this thing congregates this virus mixing. Surely, if they're not being quarantined, I'm trying to get this out. Yeah, if they're not being quarantined then you're going to have a bigger hump on this curve than in, for example, Spain, where now maybe that hump is going to be pushed down because people are quarantining. Does that not make sense?
Yeah.
Or am I wrong? Am I wrong?
No. Part of the problem is it's the climate. Britain has, unfortunately,
it has a better climate for flu type stuff.
Our climate is a big problem.
What's that got to do with it, though? The principle's the same. If you quarantine people, then you're going to get the hump down.
This is the thing. Our climate and the way the weather, with the weather changes that are going to happen over time, we are not going to get to a period where basically this virus is not going to survive outside of a host until August. So whereas other countries are going to get to that point quicker, Britain is actually perfect climate for this virus to spread. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to get anyone that's going to be killed by this and get it out of the way. They're trying to get that done so that they can get this hump out of the way before, so that we can kind of get it out of the way before, because otherwise we're going to be affected for a longer period of time in the UK. Other countries are trying to push that hump further down the line through quarantine, and it will benefit them because by the time they get to the hump of when they're going to get the mass amount of things like
it'll be
Spain
summer.
and all that, their climate is actually going to be warmer.
That's true.
And it's not going to be surviving, which means the hump's not going to happen. We know the hump's going to happen in the UK. So we're just trying to get the hump out of the way. And then when there's not the people to be killed by it, effectively, in effect, he's doing sacrifice for the
greater good.
Good of the many.
So you agree? You think that this policy from the British government is the right policy for the UK?
I think that it's the only policy they now have available to them for the climate, and the climate does pay. This virus has been proven that when it is outside of a host, if it hits that magic figure, I'm sorry, I'm going to work on American figures because I'm having to try. It's about 78 degrees Fahrenheit, about 20 some. It's kind of mid 20s Celsius. When it hits that figure outside the host, it's gone. It's killed. So if it's lying on a metal pole and that metal pole gets above that temperature, it fries it. So the Mediterranean countries, they have to quarantine because if they quarantine, they can stop the spread of it until such time as their weather gets to a point that it's going to anywhere where when it is being spread on surfaces and all of that, it's not going to get spread on the surfaces because the surfaces are going to fry it.
Okay, I'm just
America took the right.
Time for everyone.
America took the
Hold on. Non-essential.
Sorry, go on, Chris. Just briefly.
America
please,
took the right response by closing off the borders, and quite wittingly, to bring us up to a funnier note, Mexico is now talking about it's concerned about the spread of the coronavirus from America to it. So in order so that it can stop it getting into Mexico before
they're building a wall.
Before they're going to build a. So what's actually looking like it's going to happen is they're not going to build their own wall because that's going to cost them more money. So they're probably going to actually now start paying America money to accelerate the building of the southern wall.
Chris, I was joking. Is that true?
Yes.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, because they're now talking about building a wall to protect Mexico from people coming over from the border from America and bringing the coronavirus from a colder climate. So before they get to a hotter temperature, so it will to stop it spreading. So the likelihood is they're not going to spend. Mexico hasn't got the money to build a wall that on their border. So, of their own wall. So they're likely just to give money to the American government to make it a joint project, which means Trump's then going to have fulfilled on his campaign promise of getting Mexico to pay for the wall.
Chris Boosey, mate, thank you. God bless you. Blimey. Is that... Hold on. Where's the music? Where's the music? Oh, no. Hold on. For crying out loud. I don't know. Anyway, no music. Cool. I'll have to work that out for tomorrow. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Chris Boosey and me. Chris Boosey in California in the States and myself in Spain. Viscount St Davids was a no-show. I spoke to him earlier. I don't know what happened to him, but hopefully he'll be with us tomorrow to tell us a little bit about his personal brush with coronavirus over the weekend. And some of you in the comments have been asking, does anybody actually know anybody who has had this thing? Well, yeah, apparently the Viscount does. He knows a couple of people who've had this thing. So there you go. Apparently somebody has. That's some music. That's some outro music. Just a couple of comments while we finally... Right, a couple of comments to leave. Yeah, Charlotte Jameson's got a pretty good point. She says, the way people have reacted to this is the reason we're not told the truth about Area 51. Boosey, God bless you, mate. Will you come back on maybe later in the week? We'll have another chat.
Yeah, you tell me when you want me on, and I'll arrange what studies I am doing around it.
Oh, mate, fantastic!
I've got what 6? I think I've got maybe 6-7 hours of study.
Lovely.
Instead of 40 hours of study based on what's happening now. So.
Good, excellent. And all sorts of people will be coming on. It's so easy to get guests for this show because everybody's going to be in quarantine with coronavirus. Ha ha! So 5 o'clock. Do us a favour, folks. Share the show. Like it. Subscribe. Send us whiskey. All that stuff. 5 p.m. Daily. Every day. I might just do this 7 days a week. Just for the hell of it. I haven't got anything else to do. Just twiddling my fingers in the flat. And thanks everybody for your comments. I will sort out the phone lines tomorrow, which I failed to do today, so that you can call in as well. And it'll be really, really good to hear your tales for good and bad. I'm sure that over the coming months we're going to have a few laughs and a few tears, probably. Let's face it. I'll tell you something, actually, just before we go, Chris. I'll tell you something funny that happened today. I haven't said it on the show today, but the Spanish king, apparently the royal family is completely mired in corruption again. And,
was it the one that stepped down, the king that stepped down, and his son's taken over?
Juan Carlos abdicated in 2014 or something.
The one that said, "Yes, I'm corrupt, but my son isn't."
That's right. Basically, that's exactly what's happened. The old Spanish king, to protect the monarchy, has said, I am a crook, but my son isn't. And I'll tell you what, but he took a bung of 65 million euros from the Saudis for brokering an infrastructure project, did the old Spanish king, Juan Carlos. And his son was a beneficiary of that fund, which, guess what, was in Panama, one of those. And this thing was uncovered a year or so ago, and it was all kept under the rug. What have you?
This
it was
sounds
announced
very
last night.
Biden-esque,
This
doesn't
king,
it?
just a sec. This King Felipe announced it last night and said, "Oh, I'm distancing myself from my father, and I'm taking him off the equivalent of the civil list as well while we're about it to try and protect the monarchy." And announced on the eve of the quarantine. How cynical is that, Chris?
But yeah, but best time to bury bad news, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Absolutely.
But
Anyway.
as I was saying, it's very Biden-esque. If you think about the...
Right. Okay, that's it. God bless you. A bit of a cock up with the sound at the end. But yeah, see you tomorrow. 5 o'clock GMT, 1 p.m. EDT, 4 a.m. Australian time, Sydney or something. Right. Ciao. Yeah. Blimey.